Alrighty, hello everyone. So our presentation today is on the drug Prozac. So an overview of Prozac is the brand name is Prozac and the generic name is fluoxetine hydrochloride. It was created by the Eli Lilly company and the FDA approved it in 1987. So the indications of this drug are for major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, bulimia nervosa, panic disorders, and it is a treatment-resistant depression and bipolar combined with olanzapine. So basically the overview of this ad was it's a product claim ad, it's targeted towards middle-aged women, and it promises a therapeutic triad, confidence, convenience, and compliance, and we will be talking about that throughout this entire PowerPoint. And at the very bottom, it is very hard to read, but it describes the risks and basically the clinical trials that it went through. So the FDA guidelines, so basically the FDCA is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So that means that all prescription drugs advertisements must include a true statement of information, including the side effects, the contradictions, and effectiveness. And it has to be balanced, truthful, it can't be misleading, and this ad really doesn't follow along with that. So basically, oversight of the Eli Lilly and Prozac advertising, there wasn't any public warning letters. There was a broader FDA warning in September, but again, it didn't really focus on Prozac. It really just focused on other medications. So the overview, so the OPDP, basically all three of these will basically have the same end meaning. So basically the first one oversees the check for accuracy, balance, and make sure it's not misleading. The FDCA is the truthful statement. It can't have any contradictions. It has to, bear its side effects openly, and it has to be effective. And then lastly, DTC has to be clear and neutral. So the ethical and consumer impact, which really the consumers are the main people being impacted here. So the ad shows specific targeting. So like we said earlier, middle-aged women, neonate and postpartum consequences. That was a big question in the research. And this is kind of a hard demographic to study because of the informed consent, and especially with the ramifications with fathers not consenting. And of course, the developing teens and young adults and the suicidal thoughts that were impacted by this drug. And then the clarity of benefits, excuse me, the ad is very vague and misleading. The FDA has requirements put in place so these ads do not affect the consumers in a negative way. And that means that there's no exaggeration. There has to be benefits that are clearly described, and there has to be evidence. The main problem in this ad was the oversimplification, and it was very known that it was emotionally persuasive. So again, the compliance, you have to it omits facts about the risks, the side effects are less prominent, and it just basically violates the FDA regulations. So the balance of information was very poor. The risks were in fine print at the bottom. It's very vague, it's hard to understand, and it really is just vague about the therapeutic triad that it talked about. And again, going into that, the tone and the language was very vague, it's oversimplified, and when it wasn't, it was hard for the average consumer to understand. So the presentation of the risks, the FDA requires the risks and the side effects being fairly presented, and this just did not do that. It only partially meets the requirements. The risks are in small print, like we said before, and it has a visual design that minimizes the risks that it does talk about. So this was the rubric that we did. The strengths were very limited compared to the weaknesses. The benefits were just having a lack of evidence. The visual imbalance very obviously favored the benefits. The emotional appeal dominates, just like we talked about earlier, and the FDA has just a lot of compliances that were a concern here in this ad. So the recommendations for this ad would definitely be to add more clarity and support by adding scientific evidence. The emotional appeal definitely needs to be limited, especially with the Prozac fluoxetine hydrochloride promise. That gives a lot of consumers a false hope. And the fair balance regulations, you need to enlarge the font size and have the majority of the risks and the side effects be equal. So consumer understanding, again, 88% of Americans struggle with medical literacy, and public awareness is a big deal. So abiding by the FDA regulations is a big deal when it comes to drugs like this. So in conclusion, the ad was not compliant. The FDA has regulations put in place that this just did not follow. The ad does evoke emotional appeal through its imagery and slogans, but it oversimplifies the risks, which is not a fair balance. So here are our references. I hope you enjoyed this PowerPoint. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you for watching.